The Great Hall of Nexus Prime was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known galaxy. Its ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed inside it. Thousands of seats rose in circular tiers, filled with delegates from 12 founding civilizations of the Galactic Council. Floating cameras broadcast every word to trillions of beings across 10,000 worlds. President Catherine Morris sat in humanity's assigned section, a small area near the back of the hall. Humans had joined the Council only 112 years ago, making them the youngest species in the chamber. The older races treated them like children who had wandered into an adult conversation. She had been sitting in this same seat for 17 months. 17 months of listening to speeches. 17 months of watching delegates argue about proper diplomatic language. 17 months while innocent people died. Commander Daniel Carter stood behind her chair, his uniform perfect, his face carefully blank. But she knew him well enough to see the anger in his eyes. Beside him, Admiral Patricia Vance reviewed reports on her datapad, her silver hair pulled back in a tight military braid. She had stopped speaking 3 months ago. There was nothing left to say. On the main platform, Ambassador Thalos of the Zenthari continued his speech. The Zenthari were an ancient species, their bodies tall and thin, covered in flowing robes that hid their multiple limbs. They had been part of the Council for 60,000 years and considered themselves the moral leaders of galactic civilization. "We must remember," Thalos said, his voice flowing like music through the translation systems, "that the principles of diplomatic engagement require patience. The Varekari Dominion, though their actions trouble us, must be approached with understanding. Perhaps they have grievances we do not yet comprehend. Perhaps their conquest of Velen, for tragic as it was, stems from wounds we have not addressed." Catherine felt her hands tighten on her armrests. Velen 4. 3 million people dead. Entire cities burned to ash. The survivors taken as slaves to work in Varekari mines until their bodies broke. And Ambassador Thalos was talking about understanding their grievances. The Morvathi delegate spoke next. The Morvathi were beings of living crystal, their bodies catching the light and throwing rainbows across the chamber. They were beautiful and ancient and completely useless. "We propose economic sanctions," the Morvathi said. "A complete trade embargo on Varekari goods. Within 200 years, their economy will surely feel the pressure." 200 years? Catherine did the math in her head. At the current rate of Varekari expansion, they would conquer 40 more worlds in 200 years. Billions more dead. Billions more enslaved. The Krilva delegate clicked and chirped. The sound translated into words. "We submit a resolution condemning Varekari aggression in the strongest possible language. This council must send a clear message that such behavior is unacceptable." A resolution. A piece of paper? That would certainly stop the Varekari warships from burning another city. Catherine looked around the chamber. She saw the faces of delegates who had been talking for 17 months. They would talk for 17 more. They would talk forever if she let them. Talking was safe. Talking required no risk, no sacrifice, no hard choices. The refugees she had met last month did not have the luxury of talking. She had visited a camp on the border world of Haven's Rest. Families huddled in temporary shelters, children crying for parents they would never see again. An old woman had grabbed Catherine's hand and begged her, actually begged her, to do something. "Council will protect you," Catherine had said. The words tasting like ash in her mouth. The old woman had looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "The Council talks. The Council always talks. We need someone who will act." Ambassador Thalos was speaking again, beginning what sounded like another 4-hour lecture on the sacred principles of non-intervention. He had given this exact speech 6 times in the past year. Catherine could recite it from memory. She stood up. The movement was small, simple, but its effect was immediate. Silence fell across the chamber. In 112 years of council membership, no human representative had ever interrupted a senior species delegate. It simply was not done. Thelos's tendrils quivered with shock. The human delegate will wait her turn to speak. "Protocol demands enough talking," Catherine said. Her voice was calm, steady, but it carried across the silent chamber. "Let's begin." The translation systems hummed, carrying her words to every corner of the hall. Several delegates gasped. The Morvathi representative made a sound like breaking glass. "Begin what exactly?" demanded the crystalline being. Catherine looked directly into the floating cameras, knowing that her face was appearing on screens across the galaxy. Trillions of beings were watching. Trillions of beings who had lost hope that anyone would ever stand against the Wrecker. "War," she said simply. "Humanity declares war on the Vakari Dominion. Any species that wishes to join us may do so. Any that does not, stay out of our way." The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates shouted over each other. Ambassador Thelus's voice rose above the noise, calling for order, calling for sanity, calling for someone to stop this madness. Catherine turned and walked toward the exit. Commander Carter fell into step beside her, then Admiral Vance. The rest of the human delegation followed, their footsteps echoing in the chaos. Madame President Carter said quietly, "You just declared war on the largest military power in the galaxy. Without council approval, without allied support, I know. The Vakari have conquered 37 species over the past 10,000 years. No one has ever beaten them, I know." Admiral Vance spoke for the first time in months. Her voice was rough from disuse, but there was something new in it. Hope. "How long do we have before they respond?" "Weeks, maybe. They'll think we're bluffing at first. They always do." Catherine pushed through the doors into the corridor beyond. "By the time they realize we're serious, I want our fleets in position." "What about the council?" Carter asked. "They'll try to stop us. Economic pressure, political isolation." Catherine stopped walking and turned to face her aides. Through the doors behind her, she could still hear the shouting of delegates who had spent 17 months accomplishing nothing. "Let them try," she said. "While they write resolutions and debate proper diplomatic language, we will be freeing slaves and saving lives. History will judge which approach was right." She started walking again, faster now, with purpose. "Admiral Vance, I want a full fleet mobilization within 72 hours. Commander Carter, prepare a message for every human colony and station. Tell them what we're doing and why." "And what exactly do I tell them, Madam President?" Catherine smiled, but there was no softness in it. "Tell them that humanity is done watching innocent people suffer. Tell them that someone finally said enough. Tell them that we are going to war and we are going to win." Behind them, the doors of the great hall closed on the chaos within. Ahead lay the unknown, the dangerous, the impossible. Catherine Morris walked toward it without hesitation. Humanity had been waiting for this moment for 100 years. They were ready. The galaxy just did not know it yet. 3 weeks after President Maurice walked out of the Galactic Council, the galaxy watched in stunned silence as the human fleet mobilized. News broadcasts showed endless lines of warships leaving orbital stations. Military analysts from a dozen species tried to count them and kept losing track. 400 warships, the largest human fleet ever assembled. And this was only the first expeditionary fleet. Admiral Patricia Vance stood on the bridge of the carrier Resolute, watching her fleet form up through the massive view screen. The ships moved with precision, each one sliding into position like pieces of a vast puzzle. She had trained these crews for 30 years. They were ready. Captain Gregory Palmer, her second in command, approached with a tactical report. "All ships report battle ready, Admiral." "We can jump to the combat zone within the hour?" Vance nodded, her eyes never leaving the view screen. "What are the Council species saying?" "The usual. The Zenthari have issued 17 formal protests. The Morvathi are threatening economic sanctions." The usual talk. Palmer paused. "But there's something else. The Krilve have gone silent. No statements, no condemnations, just silence." Vance allowed herself a small smile. She knew what silence meant in Krilvea culture. They were watching, waiting, deciding. Across the fleet, human crews prepared for battle. Unlike other species who had gradually reduced their military forces over thousands of years of peace, humanity had never stopped building warships. They had never stopped training soldiers. They had never stopped preparing for the day when talking would not be enough. Other species found this strange. The Xanthari had once asked a human ambassador why humans maintained such a large military when no one threatened them. The ambassador had smiled sadly and said, "Because we know ourselves. We know what happens when good people fail to prepare." The Galactic Council had laughed at human ships for a century. The vessels were ugly, blocky, covered in what other races called primitive weapons. They had none of the elegant curves of Xanthari cruisers or the crystal beauty of Morvathi. Vessels' human ships looked like they were built to fight. Because they were. While the fleet prepared, the war had already begun on the ground. On the colony world of Havens, Rest, Lieutenant Commander Nina Santos led a team of soldiers through burning streets. Vakari scouts had arrived 3 days ago, the vanguard of an invasion force. They expected to find a terrified population waiting to be conquered. They found Nina Santos instead. She was 32 years old, small in stature, with dark hair cut short for combat. She had grown up on a border colony, spent her childhood hearing stories of Varekari raids. While other children played games, she studied tactics. While other teenagers dreamed of peace, she prepared for war. Sergeant Major Paul Hendricks moved beside her, his rifle ready. He was twice her age, with scars on his face from 3 previous combat deployments. He had seen the Vrecker up close. He knew what they did to captured populations. "Enemy patrol, 200 meters," he whispered. 6 warriors. Standard configuration. Nina studied the Vreckeri through her scope. They were large beings, nearly 3 meters tall, with thick armored skin and multiple arms. Each one carried enough weapons to equip a human squad. They moved with the casual arrogance of conquerors who had never faced real opposition. "Take them quietly," Nina ordered. "I don't want them calling for backup." Her team moved like shadows. The Varekari never saw them coming. In 30 seconds, 6 enemy warriors lay dead in the street, killed before they could fire a single shot. Nina stepped over the bodies without looking down. There was no time for hesitation. The main Varekari force would arrive within hours. The refugee camp was 2 kilometers east. 12,000 civilians, mostly elderly and children, waiting for evacuation ships that might not arrive in time. Nina had promised them she would hold the line. She intended to keep that promise. They reached the defensive position as the sun began to set. Hendricks had chosen the location well. A narrow valley between 2 ridges. The only approach to the refugee camp that Vreckeri landing craft could use. A perfect killing ground. "How many do we have?" Nina asked. 300 soldiers. 2 heavy weapons teams. Enough ammunition for maybe 6 hours of sustained combat. Hendricks looked at the valley below. "Intelligence says the Vrecker are bringing 5,000 warriors in the first wave." Third were so unweird. Well unweighed. Da 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 da. The math was simple. They would lose. Nina smiled grimly. "Then we'll have to make every shot count." The Varekari arrived at dawn, their landing craft descending like metal locusts. The commander broadcast a message on all frequencies, demanding immediate surrender. He promised quick deaths for those who cooperated, slow deaths for those who resisted. Nina opened a channel. "This is Lieutenant Commander Nina Santos of the United Earth Military. This world is under our protection." The Vreckeri commander laughed, a harsh sound that the translators struggled to convert. One human officer thinks she can stop the Dominion? You have no fleet, no reinforcements. You are nothing, maybe Nina said. But I have 300 soldiers who aren't afraid of you, and I have a message for your warriors. What message? Nina looked at her soldiers, saw the determination in their faces. They knew the odds. They had volunteered anyway. Come and take them. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Varekari advanced in waves, each one larger than the last. They expected the humans to break, to flee, to beg for mercy. Humans always seemed so soft, so weak. They learned differently. Human soldiers held their positions even when wounded. They fought hand to hand when ammunition ran low. They used their own bodies to shield injured comrades. They did not retreat. They did not surrender. The valley floor became covered with Varekari dead. For every human soldier who fell, 10 enemy warriors went with them. When the evacuation ships finally arrived, guided by signals from the refugee camp, the Varekari had lost 40% of their landing force. The survivors pulled back, shocked and confused. This was not how war was supposed to work. Prey was supposed to run. The Varekari commander ordered a retreat to orbit, planning to bombard the planet from space. If the humans would not surrender, he would burn them from above. He reached orbit to find Admiral Vance's fleet waiting. The Resolute led the attack, flanked by destroyers and cruisers. The Varekari warships were elegant, designed to intimidate primitive species and bombard defenseless cities. They had never been built for ship-to-ship combat. Human warships had been built for exactly that purpose. The battle lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, the Varekari fleet was debris scattered across orbital space. Not a single enemy ship escaped. Admiral Vance surveyed the wreckage from her bridge. Send word to Earth. Haven's Rest is secure, and the Varekari. Vance's eyes were cold. Send word to them, too. Tell them this is just the beginning. News of the victory spread across the galaxy within hours. On 100 worlds, beings who had lived in fear of the Varekari for generations heard an impossible story. A young species had stood against the Dominion. A young species had won. For the first time in 10,000 years, the conquered peoples of the galaxy dared to hope. Someone was finally fighting back. The humans were coming. President Catherine Morris stood before the holographic transmitter in her office on Earth. Knowing that her image was appearing in the Galactic Council chamber light years away, she could see the assembled delegates through the display, their faces showing a mixture of anger, fear, and something that might have been respect. Behind her, tactical displays showed the progress of human fleets across 3 sectors of space. World after world fell as Varekari occupation forces retreated before the human advance. In just 6 weeks, humanity had liberated more territory than the Council had managed in 60 years of diplomatic negotiations. We did not ask for your permission, Morris said, her voice steady. We did not need it. But we would welcome your help. Ambassador Thalos rose from his seat, his robes flowing around him like angry waves. Help? You want our help after you violated every principle of galactic law? You have started an unauthorized war. You have killed thousands. You have thrown the entire galaxy into chaos, no, Morris replied. The Varekari threw the galaxy into chaos when they started conquering innocent worlds. We are simply cleaning up the mess you were too afraid to address. The chamber erupted into shouting. The Morvathi representative made sounds like shattering crystal. Several Zenthari delegates stood and walked out in protest, but not everyone was angry. The Krilva delegate rose slowly. The insectoid being stood nearly 2 meters tall, covered in black chitin that gleamed under the chamber lights. For 300 years, since the Varekari had nearly destroyed their homeworld, the Krilva had remained silent on matters of war. They had retreated into themselves, building their strength in secret, waiting. The Krilva remember, the delegate said, mandibles clicking with each word. We remember what the Varekari did to our nesting grounds. We remember the eggs they crushed, the hives they burned. For 300 years, we have waited for allies brave enough to stand against them. The delegate turned to face the full council. The Krilva declare war on the Vrekara Dominion. Our high fleets will join the human coalition. This is our final word. Announcement struck the chamber like a physical blow. The Krilve maintained the third largest military in the galaxy, billions of warriors bred for combat. In a single moment, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. Before the chaos could settle, another voice spoke. The transmission came from the Torvani homeworld, carried across countless light years to appear in the council chamber. Grand Marshal Korvax, leader of the Torvani military forces, filled the holographic display with his massive frame. The Torvani were a warrior species, dismissed by the elder races as barbaric and uncivilized. They had been members of the council for 8,000 years, but had never been given any real respect. They were too violent, too aggressive, too much like humans. For 10,000 years, Korvax growled, the Torvani have waited for allies worthy of our blades. The Zintheri called us primitive. The Morvathi called us dangerous. But the humans call us brothers. He bared his fangs in what might have been a smile. The Torvani stand with humanity. Let the Vrakari tremble. On Earth, Commander Daniel Carter watched the broadcasts with growing amazement. He had been assigned to coordinate Allied forces. The task he had assumed would involve a handful of small species willing to risk Council disapproval. Instead, he was watching galactic superpowers announce their support. "This is impossible," he muttered. "We expected maybe a few minor allies. The Krilve alone have more warships than we do." President Morris smiled tiredly. "People respond to action, Daniel. For centuries, the galaxy has watched the Varakar conquer and enslave while the Council did nothing. We finally did something. That matters more than all the diplomatic speeches in the universe." The surprises continued throughout the day. A faction of younger Zenthari diplomats announced they were breaking with their government to support the human coalition. Their leader, a female named Salaith, gave an interview to human news services that spread across the galaxy within hours. "Our elders have forgotten what it means to protect the innocent," Salaith said. Her flowing tendrils arranged in patterns of sadness and determination. "They speak of principles and protocols while children die. The humans have reminded us what courage looks like. I am honored to stand with them." Back on Earth, Dr. Linda Morrison addressed a military conference. From her laboratory deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, she was the head of Earth's Advanced Weapons Research Division, a facility whose existence had been kept secret even from most human governments. "For 100 years, she explained, we have been preparing for this moment. We knew that someday we would face a threat that talking could not defeat. We built weapons that the galaxy has never seen." She revealed the projects one by one. Warships that could appear from nowhere and vanish just as quickly. Weapons that could destroy enemy vessels before they even knew they were under attack. Defense systems that could protect entire planets from orbital bombardment. The humans had been playing a long game. While the Council laughed at their primitive technology, humanity had been developing weapons in secret, waiting for the day they would be needed. That day had finally arrived. Admiral Mons integrated the new allies into her battle plans. The Krilvia hive fleets would strike from the galactic north, their billions of warriors, overwhelming Vrakari ground forces. The Torvani would attack from the south, their blade ships cutting through enemy formations. Human forces would push directly toward Vrekari core territory, the Vrekari Dominion, which had conquered 37 species over 10,000 years, suddenly faced enemies on every front. They had built their empire on fear and the certainty that no one would ever fight back. They had been wrong. On occupied worlds across the galaxy, resistance movements began to rise. Slaves who had accepted their fate for generations now dared to dream of freedom. Sergeant Major Paul Hendricks, now a legendary figure after his defense of Haven's Rest, traveled from world to world, training partisan fighters and coordinating attacks against Vrekar's supply lines. "You don't need fancy weapons," he told a group of rebels on the mining world of Kethos. "You don't need warships or advanced technology. You need the will to fight and the belief that you can win. The humans have proven it's possible. Now it's your turn." The rebels attacked that night, destroying a Vetkar fuel depot that supplied 3 sectors. It was a small victory, one of thousands happening across Vakari space. But small victories added up. President Morris watched the reports flow into her office. Victories and losses, lives saved and lives lost. The cost of war was terrible, but the cost of inaction had been worse. The council continued to protest, to threaten, to demand that humanity stop its unauthorized military action. Morris ignored them. She had made her choice when she walked out of that chamber 17 months ago. There was no going back now. Commander Carter entered her office late one evening, exhaustion visible on his face. The latest numbers, Madam President. Coalition forces have liberated 23 worlds. Estimated 12 million slaves freed. Vakari military losses are approaching 30% of their total force. And our losses? Carter's face darkened. Significant. 40,000 human soldiers dead. Another 100,000 from allied species. The Vakari are fighting harder now. They know what they're facing. Maurice closed her eyes. 40,000 lives. Each one had a family, had hopes and dreams, had trusted her decision to go to war. Is it worth it? She asked quietly. Carter considered the question carefully. I visited a liberated world last week, Velith 3. The Vakari had held it for 200 years. When our troops arrived, the local population didn't believe it at first. They thought it was a trick. He paused, remembering. A child came up to me. Couldn't have been more than 6 years old? She asked if she was free now. If she could go outside without permission? If she could keep her food instead of giving it to the masters? He looked at Maurice directly. Yes, Madam President. It's worth it. Morris nodded slowly. Tomorrow, there would be more battles, more difficult decisions, more lives at stake. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of hope. The galaxy was changing. Humanity had lit a fire that would not be extinguished. The war continued. The war entered its second year, and the galaxy learned what it truly meant to fight the Vakar Dominion. The enemy had been surprised by humanity's initial assault. They had been caught off guard by the coalition that formed against them. But the Vakari had not conquered 37 species by being weak. Once they understood the threat they faced, they committed their full military might. Admiral Patricia Vance stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching casualty reports scroll across her tactical display. The numbers were bad and getting worse. Human losses had tripled in the past 3 months. Allied forces were stretched thin across 1,000 light-years of contested space. The Vakari are throwing everything they have at us, Captain Gregory Palmer reported. Intelligence suggests they've pulled forces from their conquered territories. They're gambling everything on breaking our offensive. Vance nodded grimly. She had expected this. The Vakari were not stupid. They knew that if humanity won this war, their empire would collapse. Every slave species they had conquered would rise against them. Their entire civilization depended on victory. Then we need to make sure they lose, she said quietly. The fortress world of Ketharon became the center of the conflict. It sat at a strategic crossroads, controlling access to 3 major shipping routes. Whoever held Ketharon controlled the war. Captain Gregory Palmer led the defense. He had been promoted after Haven's Rest, given command of the coalition forces stationed on the planet. 3,000 soldiers, human and allied, against what intelligence estimated would be at least 50,000. Vakari warriors. Palmer set up his headquarters in an ancient mountain fortress, its walls carved from living rock by a species that had vanished before humanity discovered fire. The fortress guarded a narrow pass, the only approach that Vakar, a landing craft, could use to reach the civilian population centers beyond. If they get through here, 20 million civilians die, Palmer told his officers. We don't let them through. Simple as that. Lieutenant Commander Nina Santos had been assigned to his command, leading a special operations unit tasked with disrupting enemy communications. She studied the tactical displays with the cold precision that had made her famous throughout the fleet. They'll hit us with orbital bombardment first, she predicted. Try to break our defenses before the ground assault. Then wave after wave of infantry until we're overwhelmed or dead. Probably dead, Palmer agreed. But that's not the point. Every hour we hold them here, is an hour for the evacuation ships to get civilians to safety. Every day we survive is a day for Admiral Vance to bring reinforcements. And if reinforcements don't come, Palmer smiled, though there was no humor in it. Then we make sure the history books remember what happened here. The Valkyrie arrived on a cold morning, their fleet darkening the sky above the mountains. The bombardment began immediately, plasma fire raining down on the human positions. The ancient fortress shook, but held. It had been built to withstand worse. Then came the ground assault. 50,000 Valkyrie warriors poured into the valley, their battle cries echoing off the mountain walls. They moved like a living tide, each warrior standing nearly 3 meters tall, armored and armed with weapons that could tear through steel. The humans opened fire. The first wave died before they reached the defensive lines. The second wave made it closer. The third wave breached the outer perimeter before being pushed back. Each assault cost the Valkyrie thousands of warriors. Each assault cost the human soldiers they could not replace. Days became weeks. Palmer's force shrank from 3,000 to 2,000 to 1,000. Medical facilities overflowed with wounded. Ammunition ran dangerously low. And still the Valkyrie came. On the 20th day, Palmer received a message from Admiral Vance. Reinforcements delayed. Enemy fleet interdicting our approach. Hold as long as you can. Palmer looked at his exhausted soldiers. At the walls covered with names of the fallen, at the valley below where Valkyrie bodies lay in piles, behold, he said simply. On the 30th day, the Valkyrie changed tactics. Instead of frontal assaults, they began infiltrating through the mountain caves, attacking supply lines and rear positions. Sergeant Major Hendricks, now serving under Palmer's command, led counter-infiltration teams through the darkness, hunting enemy scouts. They're getting desperate, Hendricks reported after one such mission. They've lost 40% of their force and haven't taken a single objective. Their commander must be furious. Good, Palmer replied. Angry enemies make mistakes. On the 35th day, a Valkyrie infiltration team nearly reached the civilian evac. Uation point. A young private named Amy Shao spotted them first and raised the alarm. Then held a corridor alone for 10 minutes until reinforcements arrived. She died with 17 enemy warriors around her body. Palmer wrote her name on the wall of the fortress with the others. The list was very long now. On the 40th day, the Valkyrie launched their final assault. Every warrior they had left, every weapon, every resource. They came at dawn, a wave of death that seemed to stretch from horizon to horizon. Palmer stood on the walls of the fortress, his rifle in hand. Around him, the last 400 defenders prepared to meet the enemy. They had no reinforcements, no escape, no hope of survival. They had only their duty and each other. It has been an honor, Palmer said over the communication channel, his voice reaching every soldier. Whatever happens today, remember that we bought time. We saved lives. We proved that some things are worth dying for. The Valkyrie reached the walls. Hand-to-hand combat spread along the defensive line. Human soldiers fought with rifle butts and knives when ammunition ran out. They fought with bare hands when weapons broke. They fought until they could not fight anymore. Captain Gregory Palmer died on the walls of the fortress, surrounded by the bodies of enemies he had killed with his own hands. His final transmission, recorded as Valkyrie warriors closed in around him, would be played in schools across the galaxy for generations. Tell them we held, he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. Tell them they can win this. 2 hours after Palmer's death, Admiral Vance's fleet broke through the Valkyrie blockade. Her warships descended on Cathoran like avenging angels, their weapons tearing through enemy formations. Coalition ground forces landed in drop pods, screaming battle cries as they fell from the sky. The Valkyrie, exhausted and depleted from 40 days of failed assaults, broke and ran. Those who reached their ships fled into space. Those who did not were shown the same mercy. They had shown to countless conquered peoples. None Admiral Vance walked through the ruins of the mountain fortress 3. Days later, she found the wall where Palmer had written the names of the fallen. 217 names. She added his own at the bottom. 400 defenders held 50,000 enemies for 40 days, she said to Commander Carter, who had accompanied her to the surface. Military experts will study this battle for centuries. The cost was terrible, Carter replied. Yes. Vance looked at the valley below, still covered with the dead. But sometimes the cost of not fighting is worse. Palmer understood that. News of Kethron spread across the galaxy. The story of 400 soldiers who held against impossible odds became a legend. Told in 100 languages on 1,000 worlds. Recruitment for the coalition doubled within weeks. Species that had remained neutral announced their support for humanity. President des Usays, Maurice, spoke at a memorial service on Earth. Her words broadcast to every human colony. They asked us why we fight, she said. They asked us why we sacrifice our best and brightest for people we have never met. Captain Gregory Palmer answered that question at Cathorin. He answered it with his life. She paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. Parents who had lost children, children who had lost parents. All of them grieving, all of them proud. We fight because someone must. We sacrifice because freedom is worth any price. And we will not stop until every slave is free and every tyrant is brought to justice. The crowd rose to their feet, not cheering but silent, their resolve written on their faces. The war continued. The tide was beginning to turn, year 3 of the war. The human-led coalition stood at the gates of Vrek Prime, the homeworld of the Dominion. Admiral Patricia Vance surveyed the enemy planet through the view screen of the Resolute. The world hung in space like a dark jewel, its surface covered with fortress cities and orbital defense stations. For 10,000 years, no enemy had ever threatened Vrek Prime. The Vrekar had always fought their wars on other people's worlds. That time was over. Coalition fleet is in position, the tactical officer reported. 3,000 warships. Human, Krilva, Torvani, and allied forces. The largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Vance nodded slowly. 3,000 ships. Millions of soldiers. All of them ready to end this war. The Vrekari Supreme Commander, Overlord Tarkith, had requested a ceasefire to discuss terms. He wanted to negotiate a settlement that would preserve his empire, or at least parts of it. He still believed the coalition might be willing to compromise. He did not know. President Catherine Morris. Morris traveled to the front lines aboard the Resolute, insisting on delivering humanity's terms in person. Commander Daniel Carter had argued against it. Admiral Vance had warned of the danger. Morris had listened to their concerns and then ignored them. This war began because I walked out of a diplomatic chamber, she said. It will end with me looking our enemy in the eye. The meeting took place on a neutral station, a small outpost in the dead space between the fleet and the planet. Overlord Tarkith arrived with an escort of elite warriors, each one towering over the human delegation. He stood nearly 4 meters tall, his armored skin covered with scars from 1,000 battles. President Maurice was not impressed. She walked into the meeting room with only Commander Carter beside her, refusing the security detail that Vance had insisted upon. Tarkith had expected her to show fear. Instead, she sat down across from him and pulled out a single document. Unconditional surrender, she said. The complete dismantling of the Vrekari military. Reparations to every world you have ever conquered. War crimes tribunals for your leadership. Tarkith stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a harsh sound that filled the room. Hey, this is a joke. No species has ever demanded such terms from the Dominion. You cannot expect us to accept this. Morris met his eyes without flinching. I expect nothing. I am telling you what will happen. You can accept these terms now, or we can destroy your fleet, invade your planet, and impose them by force. The choice is yours. We will fight to the last warrior. Then you will die to the last warrior. Your choice. Tarkith leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the table. You speak brave words for such a small creature. Do you know how many species said the same thing before we conquered them? Do you know how many heroes we have broken? Maurice smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We are not other species. We are human, and we do not break. The negotiations ended without agreement. Tarkith returned to his planet, believing that a final desperate defense might still save his empire. He was wrong. The Battle of Vrek Prime lasted 3 months. The Vrekar fought with desperate fury, knowing that defeat meant the end of everything they had built. They threw ships and soldiers at the Coalition fleet in endless waves, each attack more suicidal than the last. Admiral Vance commanded the fleet with cold precision, her tactics refined over a lifetime of preparation. She broke the Vrekari formations one by one, methodically destroying their ability to resist. When enemy ships fled, she pursued. When they surrendered, she accepted. When they fought, she killed them. On the planet's surface, Coalition ground forces established beachheads despite fierce opposition. Lieutenant Commander Nina Santos led her Special Operations Unit in strikes against critical infrastructure, disabling planetary shields and communication networks. The work was dangerous, with casualty rates exceeding 50%. She did not hesitate. She had not hesitated since the day she watched the Vrekari butcher civilians on Haven's Rest. The final obstacle was the Command Citadel, a massive fortress in the heart of the capital city. Overlord Tarkith had retreated there with his remaining loyal forces. Protected by shields that Coalition weapons could not penetrate, Santos studied the fortress from a hidden observation post. Her team gathered around her. The shield generators are underground, connected to the main power grid. If we can infiltrate the tunnel network and disable them, the fleet can take out the Citadel from orbit. Sergeant Major Hendricks shook his head. That's a suicide mission. The tunnels are crawling with Vrekari guards. We'd have to fight through kilometers of defended positions. Yes, Santos agreed. But it's the only way to end this quickly. Every day this war continues. More people die. She looked at her team. 12 soldiers, all veterans, all survivors of countless battles. They had followed her through 3 years of hell. She was about to ask them to follow her one more time. I won't order anyone to come with me, she said. Volunteers only. Every single one of them stepped forward. The infiltration began at midnight. Santos led her team through maintenance tunnels that the Vrekari had overlooked, crawling through spaces too small for their bulky warriors. They moved in silence, killing guards with knives to avoid raising alarms. The deeper they went, the more resistance they encountered. Hendricks took a wound to his shoulder, but kept moving. A young corporal named Tony Reyes died holding a choke point while the others pushed forward. Another soldier fell, then another by the time they reached the shield generator. Only Santos and 3 others remained. The generator room was huge, filled with massive machinery that hummed with power. A dozen Vrekari guards stood between them and their objective. Santos looked at her remaining team, then at the guards, then at the equipment they had carried through kilometers of enemy territory. Cover me, she said, and charged. The battle lasted 90 seconds. When it ended, Santos was the only one still standing, bleeding from wounds she could not count. She planted the explosive charges with hands that trembled from exhaustion and blood loss, then triggered her communications unit. Admiral Vance, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Shields down in 30 seconds. Santos, get out of there. No time. She leaned against the generator, watching the countdown on her charges. Just make sure you finish this. Nina, it's been an honor, Admiral. Tell the President we kept our promise. The shields around the command citadel flickered and died. Admiral Vance's fleet opened fire. The citadel, unprotected, crumbled under the bombardment. Overlord Tarkith died in the ruins, along with the last remnants of Rectory leadership. The war was over. President Morris delivered the news to the galaxy from the bridge of the Resolute. Standing before cameras that broadcast her image to trillions of beings across known space, "The Rectory Dominion has fallen," she said. 10,000 years of tyranny have ended. The slaves are free. The conquered peoples can rebuild. Justice has been done. She paused, thinking of all those who had died to make this moment possible. Gregory Palmer on the walls of Cathorin, Nina Santos in the tunnels beneath the Citadel, 40,000 human soldiers and hundreds of thousands of allied troops who would never see the peace they had fought for. "We're called young," Maurice continued. "Primitive, aggressive. Perhaps we are all of those things, but we are also this. We are the species that does not look away from suffering. We are the species that runs toward danger, not away from it. We are the species that says enough and means it." In the Galactic Council chamber, delegates who had opposed the war now rose to their feet. Even Ambassador Thalos, who had protested every step of humanity's campaign, stood in silent respect. "The Vrekari asked us once why we fought so hard for people who were not our own," Morris said. "We did not have a good answer then. We do now." She straightened, old shoulders somehow seeming younger, because someone had to. And because we could, the galaxy erupted in celebration. On 1,000 worlds, beings who had lived in slavery sang songs of freedom. On 1,000 more, those who had lived in fear looked to the stars with hope instead of terror. 1 month later, the Galactic Council voted unanimously to restructure its charter. The new agreement included mutual defense provisions and rapid response protocols for future threats. The younger species, led by humanity, were given equal voice with the elder races. Admiral Vance retired from military service, taking a teaching position at Earth's military academy. She wrote textbooks on tactics and strategy that would be studied for generations. Commander Carter became the first human to serve as Secretary General of the Galactic Council. He spent the rest of his career building bridges between species and ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated, Sergeant Major Hendricks. Despite his wounds, returned to active duty training the next generation of soldiers. He was known for telling new recruits the same thing every time. "You think you know what courage means? You don't, but I'm going to teach you." President Catherine Morris served 2 more terms before retiring to a small farm on Earth. She wrote her memoirs, visited schools, and spent her final years in peace. When she died at 93, her funeral was attended by representatives of every species in the galaxy. Her tombstone bore only 4 words, the same words she had spoken in the council chamber so many years ago. "Enough talking. Let's begin." Humanity had arrived. The galaxy would never be the same.